This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly grain market report. And as always, to cover this important topic, we have with us Dan O'Brien. He is our grain market economist here at K-State. So Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely. So as always, we're going to start with our grain futures because it's a really important matter to cover and listeners are going to want to hear that first and foremost. So what do you say we start with wheat this week?
Sounds good. When you look at what's happened in the wheat market, we've certainly had a fall off of really a couple of dollars from where we were about a month ago. And yesterday as we were looking at the markets, you saw July hard red winter wheat, which is almost off the board now, closed at 867. But then September, which is now really what elevators are pricing off of, 857, et cetera. And it wasn't long ago we were seeing 10s in front of wheat prices. And so part of that has to do, of course, with the wheat harvest having come through and the availability now of wheat in the U.S. Part of it also has to do with the numbers that came out of the WASDE report that was held earlier this week, with the indications that total production is not thought by the USDA to fall off quite as much as had been indicated. There are reports now of some movement between Ukraine and Russia with regard to the availability now of their of grain possibly coming out of that country. And again, it's sort of we're all becoming Missourians. It's sort of a show me deal. We've heard discussion of this before, but there are, in a military conflict, geopolitical conflict like that, just a lot of issues that have to be worked out. But you hear of that potentially coming about, that the Ukrainian ports on the Danube now are beginning to move grain more readily. So that's on the positive side. Still, there's just a lot of damage in that country, and our friend and colleague Antonina Braiaco can talk a lot more about that with a lot more local knowledge than I have. But anyway, point is that there's some good movement there. Still, though, you look around the globe, European crops have been cut back because of dry weather there. We've got a report today, or yesterday, excuse me, that came out regarding the extension of La Nina, the La Nina weather pattern on through the rest of this year. And we've already seen what problems in our country, much less South America, that's caused. So, we stand back and look at the wheat market and we see generally some indications of things looking a little bit better. And when we come to the time where we actually dig into the WASDE report numbers, we can look at both the falling short of hard red winter wheat production in the U.S., but some of the increases we've seen in some other wheat classes. So Kansas producers, I think overall, we've had mixed harvest reports. Some in the central part of the state with really good yields, and in the western part of the state where we didn't have a summer fallow or a fallow period prior to wheat being produced or seeded last fall, generally reports of some pretty rough yields. So a lot of mixed variability, and those that did get wheat yields are still looking at prices that they're historically would be generally happy with. It's just that they're not the prices that we had a month ago. That's the issue. Their point of reference is not so much what we had the previous 3 or 4 years. It's what we just saw, and it's becoming apparent that a lot of that run up that we'd had again was affected by drought in the U.S., of course, but also by all the worries in the world market with regard to Ukraine and Russia and general problems there.
Absolutely. And, as you mentioned, we pretty much wrapped up wheat harvest in the state. I think Monday we said 95% of it was probably done in terms of what we still had left. And Marcia Boswell gave our last wheat harvest update yesterday in our program. So if you're looking for more information on how wheat harvest went, that key word there was really variability. I think that was the theme across the state. So if you're looking for more information on that, you can find that on agtoday.net on our podcast from yesterday. But as far as futures go, let's continue on here. We've still got soybeans and corn to cover.
Yes, for futures, in the materials that we put out each week on Ag Manager, there's an article out of DTN, and I'll just read the headline of it. It's by John Baranek, their meteorologist. Soil moisture deficits continuing at bad time for pollinating corn. Of course, high temperatures out here in western Kansas have our attention as irrigated corn, dryland corn, all coming into the critical tasseling and pollination period, and high temperatures during that. And I think we classify 100 to 105 as pretty high temperatures. Historically, has at times done a lot of damage to corn. So we're really concerned in our part of the world of that. Here, my office, of course, is out in the western part of the state, and we've seen non-irrigated corn, dryland corn, express the stress that it's under. A lot of rolling of leaves, and some counties, again, hesitate to name the counties, just so that they don't have more attention drawn on them than they need to as they suffer through this. But some areas in the western part of the state really in rough shape on non-irrigated. Even under irrigated, we're hearing reports of water pumping allocation limits being met, and what a year for that to happen, when they could really use the moisture, and we have such good prices. So anyway, we have those issues at play, and of course, when we have that here in the western part of the nation, you look at other parts of the country and look at soil moisture deficits, and you still see challenges in parts of Iowa, on into Nebraska. That northeast Nebraska, northern Iowa corridor has been having the ongoing dry conditions for several years, and they're probably wondering what they've done to deserve this. But it's been several years in a row where they've had similar conditions. And again, you just look in spotty manner all the way through the Corn Belt, and you have some areas that really have had soil moisture deficits. But even if they don't have soil moisture deficits, if they have extremely hot, dry weather, that can affect the viability. I hope that's right terminology of pollen in that physiological process for corn, and so it's a time of great concern. Eventually, as we talk about the WASDE report and what it projected, one thing that causes consternation on the part of farmers, and as they look at that report, is that the USDA still is projecting their linear trend line yield forecast of 177 bushels per acre. And again, but was the acreage numbers we'll talk about, but with the dry conditions that they have, it's at least raises the question whether we'll achieve that 177 bushels per acre figure. Weather could turn around. The genetics are doing wonderful things in terms of dealing with stress. Still, it's over 100 degrees during tasseling and pollination, and that raises awareness.
Absolutely. And we're actually going to cover that with our meteorologist here at K-State, Chip Redmond, in the coming segment. And he'll cover that as well, just the concern and the pessimistic almost viewpoint. Not that, we're trying to be pessimistic. It's just what we've got in terms of weather, and that there doesn't really look like there's going to be some relief anytime soon. The collision of information is that the USDA will not change that yield number until they get actual field data. And in August, they'll have farmer surveys. They may change it some then, but they really won't get in the fields themselves and make an adjustment until the September report. So we're not quote flying blind, but for those in the market that really rely on those USDA government report numbers, the response of those is likely going to be delayed. So if anything, it just sets us up for a lot of volatility around these government reports, in the August report, but especially the September report, if we come in and show that we have major yield losses, and instead of the U.S. corn number of 14.6 billion bushels, it comes, if we're 250 to 500 million bushels or more less than that, then that'll have a major impact on the U.S. corn market. For sure. And here we were hoping for some stability that time of year. That's usually the time we're looking for, that variability to really just settle down and us to have some stable markets. But with all of this coming in and weather not looking great, it might be otherwise, like you mentioned.
It's possible. And with the concerns we have for corn in July for what's happening, if hot weather continues on into August, then we'll roll over into soybeans when they have their flowering pod fill, critical reproductive time frame. So anyway, that's coming as well. And I think that when we stand back and look at soybean futures, I should mention before we get off of corn, and here I got us off of that before we got to talk about it. These corn traded yesterday about $6, still historically a very good price. And lead futures September 608 or basically 610, something like that. Still chance for a lot of volatility movement, but when you look at that and compare that to soybeans, November soybeans 1353 or 1350, 1360, something like that. Yesterday, as we were looking at those markets, and August higher than that, about 15 or so. So you're just, I guess you're still seeing very good prices historically, but we had been seeing closer to 17 or so on the top end on that July contract not that long ago. So I think any of our Kansas farmer clientele, probably a good amount of our agribusiness clientele are standing back, seeing what they have at their local situation, and seeing a lot of drought stress, and then and at the same time seeing futures generally decline, and probably have strong questions about that. I guess I would say that that the key question before us is this now the slide off into harvest, or do we still have the potential for slide off for lower prices off into fall harvest, or do we still have potential for volatility to come in and worries about crop size that could take us to higher prices? And I think that these high temperatures sure keep the possibility of volatility in the next 30 to 60 days on the table. We don't have just sterling crop conditions at all. We have some real questions to have to work our way through.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, we were wanting to wrap up corn there, but there's still soybeans to cover, and we're concerned there as well. So
yes, we are. And I think the last USDA report, as it looked at soybean production numbers in the US, the main driver there was that I guess the carryover from the acreage report that did not indicate acres would be as high as had been expected. So you bring that into play, and you're still looking at 4.5 billion bushels projected in US soybeans, but again, take about 2.6 million acres off the board, off our expectations, and now that number is lower. So what it does, in my thinking, whereas we were factoring in the high acres for 2022 and the possibility of very, very large carryouts, these lower acreage numbers have I won't say they've taken that off the table, but they've really diminished the probability of having expectations of an overwhelmed market for soybeans in 2022. At least it's reduced sharply just because the acres aren't there now.
Right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for covering our futures for the week. We previewed it here a moment ago, but we're going to be back with more ahead after this break. We're going to be covering the latest WASDE report, so stay tuned for that. But once again, that was Dan O'Brien. He is our grain market economist here at K-State, covering this week's grain market update report. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
Thank you, Samantha.
Excellent. All right, so we've got that one recorded. Let's go ahead and save it. Let's see. 15.
I've got an open window over here with the sun's changing angle enough, just enough to, I need to close that window. So.
Okay, go for it.
I think we're still good back there. So, okay.
All right.
Yeah, I've actually got to the place where I moved upstairs. And I now have an office with 2 windows, which is
Wonderful.
how many people at the university can say they have an office with 2 windows? So
Yes,
anyway,
that's a nice perk for sure.
if you made your success in terms of that type of a limited view of life, I guess there you go.
You're doing just fine then.
Right.
Awesome. Well, are you ready to go ahead and cover this WASDE report?
Yes, I am. Let me lay a couple things out just so I have them in order to address them as things come. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so there's that wheat sheet. Coarse grains. That. And the soybeans to go. All right, now one thing we can do is I've got this on page, it'd be your page number 3. Mm-hmm. They have their major highlight points, and so we could talk through that, and then they in a broad swipe, I kind of put their production summary, domestic consumption summary, export and price summaries across. So that give us, before we, if you'd like, before we dive into all the details of things, we could just see what the broader movements were across these commodities.
Okay.
You'd like.
That sounds good. Yeah. So we'll go through the highlights on that page 3. And then what was the next part you mentioned?
If you want to go with the same pattern, I think we went with wheat, feed grains or coarse grains. The world calls them coarse grains, and then oil seeds to finish up. That'd be a nice approach. Okay.
Let me go ahead and get those sheets in that order then. We said wheat. I think that's the first page anyways. Yep. Coarse grains.
And then oil seeds.
Okay. That works. Okay, sounds good to me.
All right.
Would you like me to count down again, or are you still recording?
We're still recording. We'll let Rich tear it apart.
Okay, that sounds good. This is Agriculture Today. As mentioned before our short break there, we are going to cover our WASDE report now, otherwise known as the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates. And to do that this month, we have with us Dan O'Brien. He's our grain market economist here at K-State. So Dan, thank you so much again for joining us.
Sure, appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and cover what this latest report has shown. We're going to talk about some highlights here to begin with, and then we'll kind of flow into each of those commodity groups that we talked about earlier too as well.
When we look at these World Agricultural Supply Demand estimate reports, they really do bring to mind for me the focus on the world or global nature of the commodities. Now we have some crops in the U.S. that, of course, we're stronger in. We're a predominant producer of corn in the world, along with then the South American countries and had been Ukraine. We're just as for corn, for soybeans, we're also a predominant soybean producer in the world, although Brazil certainly strong, if not exceeding our quantity amounts. Argentina also strong there. So for both corn and for soybeans, what happens in the United States, Brazil, and Argentina, and had been Ukraine, or what's happening there, all are major issues. So many other countries are either importers or just going sideways in terms of meeting their own usage. Now for wheat, different critter. We're still a major exporter, but there are just a number of countries, and I should say, thankfully, a number of countries that can grow wheat, given the importance of that as a food grain. And so we're still important there, but we're increasingly finding that transportation issues, logistics and all of that. And now in our case, financial market issues with the value of the dollar have put us in a tougher competitive position for the wheat markets. And we're not complaining, but here in the U.S. But here in I guess you stand back and look at wheat in particular here during a time when the world's had so many problems and with the Ukraine issue, we would have thought that would have been a time when U.S. wheat exports would have been just tremendous to meet that gap, but it didn't come about. We were about level, and it seemed that there was enough other wheat around the world that other players came in, other major exporters, and we were still there to export wheat if the opportunity would have come. In a major way, again, more like 1.2 or so billion bushels, but we ended up at like 775 million or 800 million, and just was a thought-provoking thing that U.S. wheat producers, that the U.S. wheat industry has to consider as it goes forward.
Absolutely. And in terms of some of the other highlights that we've seen, we're not the only region of the world that's experiencing drought, and that's had major effects on our world markets. Yeah,
the European Union here of late has had, just reading the highlights off of this WASA report, they talk about dry conditions persisting in major production regions of the European Union. And both the USDA and now the International Grains Council, following a USDA report earlier in the week, have both come out and scaled down European wheat production. If they're scaling down European wheat production, then they're reducing the amount of wheat available to be exported out of those countries. So that's at play. And then also more concern about Ukrainian wheat production that has been lowered again, 10% based on updated government acreage data, had been, and generally production down about 40+% from the previous year. And their harvest is underway, and they have, without bemoaning all that, they have logistical issues, they have fuel availability, the ongoing questions that we talked about earlier with regard to movement to export locations, of both the possibility of now reopening the ports, but probably more the issue of finding river traffic, larger ports to the Black Sea, or river traffic to the Danube is now developing. Rail transportation is also developing. So being good entrepreneurial survivors, they're seeking other ways to move grain out of the country. But still, what had been their go-to mode of exports out of Odessa and some of those other major ports is all at risk now. And of course, here in the U.S., I guess the big overall issue is that U.S. balance sheets are updated from that June acreage report, with some other carryover changes in feed usage from the grain stocks report. So, and I guess if I'm going to give a broad swipe in terms of production, you really didn't see the USDA make any changes in its crop production numbers in that July report. Those, as we had talked about in an earlier segment, those are probably coming in the August report. And for wheat, we may not see the changes until the September 30th small grain summary report. So as you look at how ag producers respond to these USDA reports, they're right now they're probably questioning the not the acreage numbers, but more so the yields. But that information we're just gonna have to wait on, I guess. And you do see some changes in domestic consumption. Soybean oil, interesting, is soybean oil production, consumption's down here in the U.S. Soybean meal increased, and you have some corn usage down about 25 million, sorghum usage about 20. The bigger issue now is with high prices, are we seeing rationing yet? Some would call that demand destruction. I don't know if I'd call it demand destruction. That from a pure economic point of view, I'd call it supply demand responsiveness to prices. It's not destroyed. It's just that as people make profit maximizing choices, they on the margin, if something costs a lot, they'll only use what they have to, and not extend it so much. And you do see some changes that happened in prices on the wheat price. down just a little bit from what had been seen. The soybean oil price down some. That would be for the old crop marketing year ending August 31st. Some projections lowered for the wheat price for next year, down 25 cents, down to 10.50, had been 10.75. Corn price down 10 cents, down still 6.65. I mean, wonderful prices historically, but soybean price down 30 cents to 14.70. So as the USDA has come in and made their adjustments in that WASDE report, it seems that they're responding to some of what's happened with the futures prices having moved lower in the last month or so. I would say that we're still at very high prices. Along with being at high prices, you have a lot of possibility for volatility. And anyway, we'll see where all that goes.
Sure. And now that we've kind of given a broad overview of what the WASDE report has really shown this month, let's kind of get into a bit more of the finer details of some of these, specifically when we're thinking about wheat, coarse grains, which of course encompass lots of things, barley, corn, and then oil seeds. Let's go ahead and cover those in a bit more detail, if you don't mind.
You bet. And so I'll just hit the highest of high points. When you look at the wheat supply demand balance sheet, the USDA in essence, for the US, they projected larger supplies and domestic use, exports, and ending stocks. Actually, I have a copy of that report here. And we say larger, it's only marginally larger. Like that, excuse me, for wheat, and now the projection has been raised to 693 million bushels to carry out. We were at 627, so that's really not much of a change. Ending stocks, we're at 33.3%. Now they're at 33.4. So really, we might say it's larger, but it's only marginally larger. Not a lot of change. What's caught my attention is the change from year to year for wheat in the different classes. So last year we had wheat production for hard red winter wheat 749 million bushels. Now it's projected at 585. So that's what we see where we live at, Samantha. You know, hard red winter wheat is down. But for hard red spring, 297 last year, 457 are projected for this year. So why would the USDA make the changes that they did, and why do we see the wheat futures markets moving lower? Well, in general, they're probably looking at that strong spring wheat crop coming in, 150 some million bushels more, seeing that as a change. Soft red winter was 361 a year ago, projected 376. So at or where it was a year earlier. White wheat was at 201 million bushels a year ago, 286 projected. So our neighbors to the north have had enough moisture for that their hard red spring, that their white wheat and their durum wheat has all come in stronger for production, and not just a little bit, but quite a bit. So what we're short on down here in hard red winter wheat country, they have more than made up for up to the north. And to the degree that there's substitutability between those classes, that's had a recent negative effect on the wheat market.
Wow. Well, you know, I feel like we in Kansas, we get so focused on our own harvest that we do sometimes forget that those other wheat varieties that flourish in other areas, they've been a little bit more lucky than we have this year in terms of rainfall.
And when you look up the drought maps that they had last year, they were as dark red to black as you could see. Well, now this year, if anything, they've had too much moisture. All the moisture that came in that affected their corn plantings and their other crop plantings helped their spring wheat. And similar situation with a whole lot of moisture up in Canada as well. So I guess it's their turn to have the moisture and to have the more sizable crops. And of course, the price projection was $7.63 that last marketing year. Now still at 10.50. And I've looked at some on some other analysis that we'll be bringing forth in coming days. The futures are now probably aiming more so. If you look at way off into the future, they're as we've seen here and talked about earlier, they're really projecting something closer to 7 or 8 dollars for cash prices down the road. Again, you see May of 23, about 870 or so. So that 1075 that we're seeing, that 1050 the USDA is projecting, probably is in disagreement with what the futures markets are saying right now. They're about $2 lower than that. So a real adjustment in the supply demand numbers and the accompanying attitude of the market towards where wheat prices will go.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned before, those USDA numbers are going to take some time to catch up just based on data coming in and when they can actually take it all into account. But moving on to coarse grains, what have we really seen on a global scale as far as coarse grains go? Yeah,
and coarse grains in the world we call feed grains in the United States. So, but it's interesting that in this WASI report they refer to it as coarse grains, and of course so much of what was going on there because of the predominant position of the United States has to do with what happened with us here with our numbers in terms of acreage and yields. So the overall U.S. Supply demand balance sheet numbers we're projecting for this current marketing year that'll end August 31st, 1.51 billion bushels of carry out, and the new numbers for the coming marketing year 1.47. So still a reduction, and of course that the I guess risk averse person in me that I as an economist I see that, and I see these production issues that we've talked about earlier, and wonder if that USDA's projection of 14.505 billion bushels will hold up. If you take 250 or 500 million bushels off of that, there'd be some rationing of usage. It doesn't take long with any crop problems in the United States to see that 1.47 billion bushels carry out be closer to 1.3, 1.2 or lower if we get a rough outcome. So I think that the questions in the corn market remain to be answered. USDA is still projecting 665 as a season average price for that next marketing year starting on September 1st. That's down a dime from where they were. But again, I think that's mainly following what the futures have done in the last month. So overall, important to look at. I would say also sorghum, major U.S. Feed grain here in the United States and Kansas in particular. And we have seen a little bit of production decrease, and the acres were up about 100,000 acres, excuse me, from where they were coming out of the end of June acres report. So 6.305 million acres. And a little bit, just a marginal decline in the outcome in terms of yields. But so that overall balance sheet number projected to be pretty much a sideways move. Ending stocks 30 million bushels, ending price of 655, a dime lower than corn. And again, where do we grow grain sorghum? We grow grain sorghum right in the heart of all the hardest hit drought areas. So yep. I think that number is maybe more at risk just because of where we grow it than otherwise. So interesting to look at. Overall, for the world coarse grain situation, they also talk about foreign production being down, reductions in Russia, the EU, Kenya, partially offset an increase in Paraguay. They've caught some moisture apparently and good growing conditions in Paraguay. So foreign corn ending stocks up marginally, really no change. Global corn stocks up about 2.5 million tons. So we talk about global corn stocks. So much depends on what happens with the United States, with Brazil and Argentina as the major players, and at least for the United States, the question where we finally end up at still is on the table.
Absolutely. And hopefully in the coming weeks ahead, we'll get more solid answers on really where our market's going to stand. But as we're running out of time here, Dan, let's go ahead and touch finally on oilseeds globally and some of those key points.
U.S. oilseed production projected at 132.7 million tons, down from last month. And again, that major reduction in soybeans is in play. And then you look at the world Ending stocks figure sideways to a little bit higher, so not counting on any major problems there. World stocks to use, ending stocks projected for this current marking are about 89 million metric ton, 99 or 100 projected. And again, that's reliant on what happens in the U.S. now, largely. And the U.S. Stocks figures, stocks to use, and ending stocks in the current marketing year, 215 million bushels. Ending stocks projected up a little bit to 230 before. And as you and I talked in the previous segment, that's after this acreage reduction in expectations. Without that acreage reduction, we'd be looking at again, 200, something closer to 300 million bushels, and probably a lot softer market. Price projected next year, $14.40. And even that is down 30 cents from where it was before. So the time of decision of risk in the soybean market in the U.S. is still coming. And we're going through that right now for corn production in terms of our tasseling and pollination. We'll be looking at flowering and pod fill in August for soybeans. And again, the weather's driving the bus in terms of where we might go in terms of actual U.S. production. And I think you mentioned it earlier. What a year to have issues like this, when boy, it'd be great to have just tremendous crops and bring more surety and security really to world food supplies. But now in this year, we have anything but that, given the geopolitical issues, the droughts that are coming on, and our own questions here in the U.S. in terms of what's going to happen in July and August to get these crops to the finish line.
Absolutely. Unfortunate timing for sure. But as always, Dan, thank you so much for these insights that you always provide. And we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Take care, Samantha.
You as well. Once again, that was Dan O'Brien. He's our grain market economist here at K-State, covering the latest WASDE report. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.